Давайте продолжим. Наш следующий докладчик Чус Мартинес, директор, глава департамента при художественном кураторе документа 13, который будет, кстати, уже в следующем году, и главный куратор Музея современного искусства в Барселоне, а также директор нового магазина, нового журнала по теории искусства, который издается в Барселоне. Журнал называется «Индекс». Тема доклада Чус Мартинес «Не здесь».
So, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm going to talk from a total different perspective probably than the talks in this morning session, since I'm not at all an expert in conceptualism, but actually I developed my activities in curatorial practice, and it's a completely different situation than analyzing or producing artworks in the same manner than it was addressed this morning. So I think that something that Boris said this morning is very true, which is conceptualism is a practice that aims or goes towards language, but also towards the notion of significance and the question of to state something, how to state something in a society. So I'm going to start by something that I know pretty well, which is the introduction of conceptual art in Spain in the late 70s. So as you probably know, we did have a dictatorship till 75, and Franco died in 78. And one of the main things that started to occur in the Spanish art museums from the beginning of from the mid-90s actually, from the mid-80s actually, was the introduction of a series of numerous shows on conceptual practices. It was not at all any conceptual practice going on in the 60s and 70s, or very little, almost nothing, perhaps some performances, but actually almost nothing that you could call like a community or an awareness about conceptual art at that time. So why then did mostly one museum, but then others follow, which was MAGBA, the one that I've been working for, why then did a museum concentrate systematically into the introduction or reintroduction of conceptual art shows and conceptual art practices into the public realm? Why? One of the possible answers to understand is that conceptual art was seen by then as a way of, first of all, since there was no practice in the country dealing with conceptual art, it was interesting to address that lack by appropriating the conceptualisms of others. In that sense, bridging a gap which is historical. I think a history that was not taking place would be reappropriated and then would kind of cover up for the years that we were out, that we were not part of the international art scene. I think, in particular, the European and the American art scene, not the Eastern European or Russian art scene. So conceptual art then became a way to gain a language that would articulate not only a practice that was dealing with object, image, and definition, but also with, as Boris was saying, with the reintroduction of the possibility of a political language, so a kind of a culture of the statement and the political awareness inside the public arena of a country that was redefining the whole public space towards democracy. So the only art that was able to travel with us towards democracy was then conceptual art. But in the 80s or in the mid-80s to the 90s, to do is all this series of conceptual art shows in all over, in Barcelona in particular, but all over the country, was also a very interesting practice of anachronism, I think, versus other art communities that were dealing with notions of installation art or even with video art, or introducing at that time in the 90s mostly cinema in the art, in the art space. Then all of a sudden you will go to MAGBA, and you would see these retrospectives of Georg Brecht or Filiu or all these situationist exhibitions and on and on and on and on. Non-stop, also of the conceptual American artists that were not exhibiting in the States. So it constituted, as I say, a ground to implement a language about the political, and also little by little to explore the fine line between a linguistic articulated practice with the possibility of you yourself creating or distillating a new political lexicon that would allow you then to talk in your own terms. So in order to talk in your own terms, you needed the others. You needed the terms of others. So this was an exercise of appropriation in aesthetical means, almost a formalist exercise of appropriation of conceptual art, so to say, but also it was a fantastic or very interesting exercise in anachronism, in introducing a time inside a time that was breaking the line or the so-called development of what our neighbors at that time were doing. And I would then say that it's kind of strange to talk about what happened after this exercise, like the echoes and what happened in the artistic production of Spain. Like what you are seeing now is an image of Yvonne Alamberri, which is an installation of the late 90s, so some kind of 15 years ago, if I don't remember it badly. And it's just a table with some objects, like it's milk, it's a lantern, it's some batteries, it's a bowl, it's a little bit of what you think it's oil or benzene for the cars, some tubes, and yeah, some kind of, if you want, some disconnected material. But the fact that he is a Basque artist and he was exhibiting this particular piece in San Sebastian, where there is a very acute awareness of the question of the danger and also terrorism, it makes that table automatically into a political statement of the possibility of building up, of making something that could potentially be a danger for the others. So. The milk, the benzene, the gas, the tubes, all of the elements of the table all of a sudden became a lexicon for a statement that was not said directly, but is on the table to be said. And when you see it, you are reading it. And when you are perceiving it, you are perceiving the danger of what is he saying. But it's only contextually based, because if he would be an artist from Sevilla doing this very piece in Sevilla, it would mean a total different thing. It would mean that perhaps there is not enough gas, or that they don't have city gas in Sevilla and people are still using these butano things, or that the milk is becoming very expensive for the unemployed people, or that there is a problem with the electricity and the lantern kind of signals towards that idea, that not in every neighborhood of Sevilla, because there is lots of Roma and Sinti people don't have electricity. So, trivialities like that. But all of a sudden, the context and the fact that he was really exhibiting that piece in San Sebastian make it and shape it as a political statement that was then a very ambiguous statement. What is Yvonne Aramberri actually saying? Is he pro or against terrorism? Is this a piece that actually is apologetic or is critical of it? And this particular piece that was a subject of censorship, and it's the only case of censorship that we have experienced since the death of Franco. I think the exhibition was open, and then the authorities wanted to close it down the next day because they did not want that table to be there. This is like resembling the tables when you find terrorists, and then you exhibit all the items that you find in the place that they were or they have been hidden. So this piece created the huge or the most important debate around the notion of censorship, and also the notion of what are you saying when you exhibit a piece like that in the public arena. And I would say that in this particular artwork created a before and after in the community, because it kind of polarizes the idea that conceptual art or pieces like that needed to be even more literal and even more eloquent when they want to address the political, that this is not sufficient, that this piece stops too early, that they need to then go into a much more argumentative practice, where you actually say what you want to say. So I am just presenting some arguments in a really disconnected manner. And I would say that my concerns right now depart from debates similar as the one that I'm presenting through Yvonne and Berry. I would not talk, and I don't think it's accurate to talk about even this piece as a conceptual piece of art, but I would talk then about conceptual tactics. That means a practice that uses conceptually oriented tactics to introduce something that for me is even more important than conceptualism itself, which is the very notion of artistic research. The way that artists are now researching in the public space, but also in the different discourses that politically, ideologically, sociologically inform that public space, and then enhance, they are able to reconnect these discourses in a very particular manner. And as Boris said this morning, in a manner that is not happening elsewhere, that is just happening in the art practice or in the art arena. But it's not only happening by showing or by producing art, but by another operation that is not addressed as much as we wish, which is research. That this is not only a piece of showing, but a piece of researching into the different languages and expectations and knowledges that are informing the possibility of perceiving that piece as we do, as a danger or as a triviality. So this is something that has been concerning me quite a lot these days, but also a second aftermath of these kind of practices or these kind of politically oriented conceptual practices that are moving faster and faster into some kind of what I call lyricism. In a novel that I really like by Milan Kundera, which is Life is Elsewhere, that he wrote in 1987, there is a poet called Jaromil, and he's talking to the girlfriend about the communist condition and the situation that they are living in. And then he says to her, aren't we living in a world where headless men only desire decapitated women? Isn't it a realistic vision of the world, the emptiest of illusions? Aren't your son's childish drawings much more truthful? So Jaromil is a lyric poet. It's a poet that believes that it's better to have wet eyes than to have dry eyes, and then it's much better to talk with a hand in your heart than actually to talk with the hands in your pocket. So in that sense, it kind of summarizes what is happening in one part of the artistic world today, which is like a faster running towards lyricism, towards a necessity of actually stating and saying what's going on and engaging with wet eyes and translating literally these notions of the sentiment and connecting the sentiment with the idea of agency. So I don't exactly know how to argument or counter-argument this is what I see as a problem, and the relationship in between the necessity for agency on the one hand and the definition of the political, which is at the core of conceptual practices, as they are stating the real and also the possibility of changing the real by just stating it. And on the other hand, the necessity of moving away and preserving a private space that would then allow us for a different action in the world that moves away from just pure action, reaction, or what I call answerability, the notion that we need to answer to our times all the time. So how can we then conceive conceptual practice as a way of preserving abstraction? That would be one of my first questions. Is it possible also to understand that these conceptual tactics are preserving something which is very important in a new redefinition of historical time, or the conception of historical time, which is they are always anachronic, that even in the most classic sense of understanding conceptualism as object-image definition, they are already a little bit late all the time. They are desynchronized with the real all the time. They are hinting towards a time that cannot be read in linear terms, that they cannot be summarized as durational time. And a third stage would be how could one understand that these conceptual tactics are helping us to analyze a third tactic, which is the introduction of a necessary nonsense that then would break with this lyric tendency that we're facing nowadays in the so-called non-commercial art. I think in the political art scene, which is like another of the, let's say, you know, effects of this expanding conceptual field, so to say. So I am very interested in these two subjects specifically. The notion of anachronism, which for me it's a very important notion because it would disconnect us from this necessity of creating readability all the time, that we need to create practices and also interpretations for these practices which are readable. And how to move away from that. How could we provide something which is rigorous and it is actually responding to what's happening, but on the other hand is not matching the response towards the framing of the question that provoked the answer, on the one hand. And also, how can we go away from this kind of literalness, or how can we move farther from ideas of sentiment? How can we go back to the dry eyes on the one hand and to the hands in the pockets without being irresponsible politically speaking? So this is a question that I have no answer, but that is something that is really worrying me these days. This notion of how can we understand agency in different terms than just running in the streets or reacting directly to what's being said. And in that sense, I do think that these conceptual tactics or the notions of research that some of the artists are implementing or putting at stake are of primordial importance. And then the other thing, and this also connects with the historical, you know, with the curatorial practices, that they are developing the notion of memory very together with this notion of historical time defined as duration, and therefore they are revisiting this historical time all the again and again through, for example, the archival or the document or the indexical or the one after the other testimony that this is what happened. So how can we actually move away from a moment that was impressively important from the mid-90s on, and also in countries like mine that needed to recuperate memory, and they needed to structure memory in a durational, so that we remember what we could not remember by the official story, so to say. But on the other hand, how can we break this kind of duration, introducing another understanding of time which is based not in duration but in rhythm? For example, what has been called rhythm analysis, that has been implemented since Bachelard on by people like Lefebvre, but has been so less studied somehow. How can we understand that we need an ontology of rhythms that could be created through these breakings or these sections of the narrative that are with works like the one I'm showing in the slide, and then you know, provide us something which is not interpretative, that goes beyond interpretation. In that sense, I'm very interested in certain tactics that use the nonsense, that they break with the very notion that we can grasp the world, that we can grasp what we see, and then answer to it. So nonsense as a method is something very interesting, because on the one hand, it's completely orthodox. It completely understands what sense is. It goes together with its time. And on the other hand, it's completely revolutionary because it reverses sense. It goes against the syntaxis, it goes against the semantic of the words, but it's kind of preserving a certain syntaxis on it. So I would argue that one possible way of exploring what's going on, or what is interesting, or it's very productive, or could be in the next years potentially interesting, would be to go first to or to advocate for the reintroduction of the tragic as polemic as this is, versus the notion of lyricism, versus a notion of sentimentality, versus the a conception of art as political answerability on the one hand, and kind of trying to define a new tragic and what this is in order to help us to define a new public arena, a new privacy somehow. And second, also to explore the possibilities of nonsense, helping us to break also with this conception of historical time as linear, as durational, and then together with the artists submerge ourselves in the way that Boris was saying when he was stating that philosophy has a new life or a second life now in the art world. I would say that then submerge ourselves into the notion of artistic research. I don't know if I should, because I have a text and I am very unable to read texts in conferences. But I don't know if I should perhaps just accept questions and then enter into the debate better than just, because it's very, I think, I'm so sorry to be very abstract, because this conference really catch me into the process of defining all these three categories and writing a text. So I feel myself as almost unable to convey them properly to you. But I do think that they are quite productive, and perhaps the questions would help me to answer better to what I mean by them.
Just a second, microphone is coming.
Thanks, and perhaps this will help. I don't understand your metaphor of wet eyes and hand on heart. I don't know if you just mean art with a political meaning relating to a quasi-tragic state of politics in Spain, or when you talk about a new lyricism, if there's some amazingly new lyrical movement in Spain that we certainly don't know anything about in London. So, and obviously this lyrical idea is either a political idea in the public domain, or it relates to personal emotion, and you were talking about the private domain. So inasmuch as it was a metaphor, and inasmuch as, like, as a guinea pig, I don't quite understand the remit of the metaphor. Maybe if you explained it, that would help us.
I think when I was talking about the lyric, it's really interesting. One of the things that really concerned me is the status of abstraction nowadays, and the status of crypticism, of privacy, of opacity. I think art has been helping to, and it's hand in hand with the definition of the political, addressing, on the one hand, this notion of transparency. So, you know, democracy needs to be processual on the one hand and transparent on the other. Otherwise, if it is processual but is not transparent, you would not be able to follow the process that lead to the decisions. So the process needs to be transparent. In this definition of representative democracy, where art plays a major role in the last 20 years, and not only a major role in showing, but also in preserving and into making an understanding what this democratization is and what are the implications of it, we enter into a stage where literalness gain an impressive space in our society, not only in everyday life and in politics, but also in art. Art is becoming more and more literal. Is also drive, part of it, political art, is drive, but this notion of answerability, and two very important for me statements are at the core of this new political art, or again, new political art, because it's not new. One is a definition of Hannah Arendt, like, you know, what makes a man political is his faculty for action. So you need to be able to act, and others need to see your act first, and second, others need to see the consequences of your act. That is what we call public domain and a transparent public domain. It's not only important that you act, but it's important that others see that you are acting so that they can and they can collaborate with you, join forces, and then change the world. So the second is André Breton when he says beauty will be convulsive or will not be at all. So that means that a movement is necessary, that we need to provoke a movement, and art is also and has been part of that movement. How can you face what's going on in Egypt or in the new or the convulsive changes in the world and then be with the hands in your pocket? How can you do that? No? So Jaromil and the novel of Kundera is actually addressing this paradox of how can you face what's going on and do nothing yourself. You need to do something. So what is the something that you do? You go with wet eyes, mostly towards Facebook, internet, TV, and so on, because you are not running in Egypt. You are here, or you are somewhere else, but you are not there. So, but there is a new system of wetting eyes, of making the eyes wet. And art has been contributing to that in a good or bad manner. That is something for us to discuss, and this is something that I would like to discuss. And people like this lyric poet embody actually a new sentimentality into the political that has been also provided by the arts themselves. Not in Spain, I think, has nothing to do with Spain, but Spain is a good case study because all through the 90s, for example, it has been Spain who actually provide the models for the most political museums, like MACBA. We have projects called like agencies, where in the, I think in 98, if I don't remember it badly, the whole museum has been occupied by political activism and all kind of, you know, movements, social movements, civil movements, and artistic movements that would join forces and then oppose the global forces and the globalization process, for example. So even the museum encourages wet eyes. Even the museum prefers the artist and the audience to talk with the hand in the heart and not with the hands in the pocket. So in that sense, yeah, it's a Spanish case, but I think it's a kind of generalized case nowadays that if you are not talking about commercial art, you are more and more talking about some kind of lyric form of the political art. And this is something that I do have a problem with, but it's a problem that does not get resolved by not addressing the political, but addressing the political differently. So the question is, how can we address the political if we don't go with wet eyes? How can we do that? What are the alternatives towards this new form of lyricism, to this, how are the conceptual tactics, quote unquote, that could help us to make things less literal or more strange or more abstract and be still able to do something or to create a movement, but a movement not in the sense of Breton, not a rupture that everyone would see, but a movement inside the structure of the language of art and in the language of society. Because the language of art, in trying to convey a political message, is trying to sync somehow with the language of a new definition of the public sphere. So this is this is the question that I am asking myself these days. How can we do that? Possible answer. As Lessing was saying in Laocoon, it could be that we cannot describe the traits of the beautiful Elena, that the more effective thing is not to try to describe how beautiful she is, and therefore they went into the war, but we tried to create what he calls a chronotope. That means to disrupt the historical or the linearity of time and then go into the core of this time definition, creating something that is different. So it could be that the most effective way to describe the beauty of Helena is by describing that the Trojans are able to go into the war for her, no? For the beauty of a woman that entered into the war. So imagine the beauty of that woman if a whole city is able to enter a war. You don't need to describe Helena anymore. So this is what is called a chronotope. And I am interested in this kind of tactics that art is actually putting at place and that we, critics or curators, are sometimes not able to read or to go deep enough. That's why I'm saying I'm addressing the fact that one of the major traits of the new conceptually oriented art is also their interest in researching these tactics, or let's say these syntactical operations, in order to make us regain, perhaps, a different understanding of the political language that we have been abusing for the last decades. So that's the one possible answer to that. It would be the nonsensical or the chronotope. And another possible answer would say, which is a much more problematic one, would be the reintroduction of a notion or a dimension or a language of the tragic in our political vocabulary, and therefore in our, and I'm saying that through the arts, I think it does not, it goes without saying. So, and I think that some artists are exactly pointing to that possibility or to that exercise of reintroducing tragedy into our public arena. So, I don't know if I answered the question. Yeah.